Hello and welcome to the Mach 1 Market Moment, where we provide financial information on topics such as investing, insurance, financial planning, and everything related to your money. A quick reminder that the hosts of the show are employees of Mach 1 Financial Group. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and nothing said in the show should be taken as investment advice. Employees and clients of Mach 1 Financial Group may maintain positions in the securities or strategies discussed. We upload a brand new podcast every Thursday, so be sure to subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. Also, follow us on all of our social media platforms. We are Mach 1 Financial Group on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube.
Hello and welcome to the Mach 1 Market Moment. This is Matt Walters here with David Lee, and today on the podcast we are extremely excited to have a very special guest. But before we jump in and introduce our guest and kind of give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about, David, what's going on? How are you doing today?
I'm good, Matt. Happy to be here with our special guest today and along with Erica, as always.
Yeah, awesome. So a lot of our listeners are in Northwest Arkansas, so a lot of people listening may have heard of Dr. Nick Floyd. Nick is the senior pastor at Cross Church, Northwest Arkansas, and he is with us today to talk about faith and finance. Really anything related to faith, money, finances, how they're intertwined, how we can use money, for the greater good, and all of these things. We're going to just kind of have a conversation today and see where it takes us. A quick introduction to Nick. Nick received his bachelor's degree from Liberty University, his master's of divinity from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and then his doctorate from Liberty School of Divinity. So very educated man, at the least. Nick has served as a board member on the Baptist State Convention since 2014. He's a team chaplain for the Arkansas Razorback football team since 2014, which I think is very, very cool. And then Nick is married to his wife Meredith, and they have 4 children: Reese, Beckham, Nora, and Maya, and Nora's with an H, and I say that because I also have a Nora with an H, so I can appreciate that. So Nick, happy to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Honored to be with you guys. Thanks for all that you do. And it is spelled appropriately with an H.
Absolutely.
We based that off Nora Jones.
Okay, there you go.
Musician, and my wife did not want the H, but I said, no, we gotta have the H.
Gotta have the H.
So we kept the H.
Yep, absolutely. Real quick, because this is the first time I've ever met you. How old are your kids?
Oh, they are 14, 11, 8, and 6.
Okay.
So it's a busy house.
Yeah, absolutely.
No doubt.
That's awesome. So like I said, today we're talking about faith and finance, and just kind of see where this takes us. But this last 12 to 18 months has been interesting, in a lot of ways, right? You look at the political environment. We had a big election. We've had a lot happen economically. A lot of people, I think, have gone through a lot spiritually, right? We weren't in church for a period of time, right? We weren't physically going to church, so that looked different for a lot of people. Still looks different. Yeah. So just, I guess, to kind of get the conversation started, what have you seen over the last year or so? What kind of issues or thoughts have people been coming to you, and where do you see us at today based on everything we've just went through?
Yeah, I think more than anything, the last 12 to 18 months has really showed us the brokenness of the world, and it's just amplified it. And so I think, a lot of things we could say, or a lot of people would say it this way, if COVID, caused a lot of these things. I think COVID revealed a lot of these things. And again, from a Christian perspective, it just shows you that none of the stuff that people are trying to find hope in or trying to fix in society will ever really be fixed this side of heaven in totality. Obviously, we work and do what we can now. I mean, I'm a pastor. If anybody believes that, I believe that. If I'm going to help people now, do what I can now. But really, the brokenness that we all experience is something that only Christ can really put back together.
So, Nick, as we were going through last year, all of the experiences you had, all the people you had coming, I would like to think or kind of guess you had people coming to you looking for answers, right? Being the leader you are, and how did you and your team and the church help guide people through everything that's taken place?
Yeah, well, I think so much of the last 12 to 18 months has been beyond our control. And really, I heard a quote of somebody even during the pandemic who said, it's not like we've lost control. We've lost the illusion of control.
Yeah.
So we really were never in control. And COVID just
Mhm.
actually stripped that away and said, listen, you really are not in charge of the world, of society, of your own life, of your health in
Right.
this instance. And so I really think that it stripped away some thoughts that we had that were obviously false in nature, but COVID has helped reveal that really it was an illusion of control in the first place.
Yeah. And we see that a lot in what we do in kind of the money world,
Yeah.
right? People look for this false sense of security in their finances.
Or a false sense of control, even.
A false sense of control, or they feel like there's this number, it's like my portfolio needs to get to this and then everything will be fine.
Yeah.
Or then I can reach this point.
Sure.
And yeah, it's a good reminder, as painful as it can be, those resets in life, that it's like, hey, a lot of that's completely out of our control.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And what they find, you mentioned if somebody can have a certain amount of money in the bank, or if they can, well, I finally got married, or I finally got that promotion. What they end up finding is that at the end of that rainbow that they thought was going to be a pot of gold, they're still empty, because all these things in the world that we try to put in the place of God never fulfill. They just don't. And so I think, again, that's been highlighted throughout this COVID season, and now that we're coming out of it a little bit, it's just it's been so true in each one of our lives.
Yeah. And as believers, people in the church, we obviously deal with all of these same issues, right? But in your opinion, how do we take some of these things that we've maybe uncovered and learned to deal with in a new way ourselves? How do we take that to, people who aren't in the church, to non-believers? I mean, how do we take that experience and that thing that's very real and recent, and then use that to spread the gospel and teach people about, that they can't have the confidence in all of these things?
Sure. I think if there's one thing that COVID did, is it brought us all at the same playing field. Didn't matter if you were wealthy or poor. Didn't matter if you were whatever. We were all at the same game of having to stay home. You're fearful for shaking somebody's hand. You don't know what's next in your life. And so I think the unique thing that believers have and hopefully had in their life throughout this was a sense of peace that really does pass all understanding. Yeah. And man, I hope it was true that many believers were living a different kind of life, that we didn't live with the same type of fear. I even shared with our church sometime during the pandemic, think about all the lengths that the world has just gone through in order not to die.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now I don't want to die right now. I know where I'm going, but it's not like I woke up and wanted to die today.
Yeah.
So it's within the human nature to want to live, but we have done so much all for the purpose to avoid dying. And the church is in a different reality. While yes, we're careful, and yes, we follow the law, we do all the things, but at the same time, there's a sense of peace and of assurance that we are to have that the world does not have. And so I think that can be a real distinguishing mark of
Right.
hopefully how we have handled the pandemic personally versus maybe those that don't know the Lord and are just in a bit of a struggle, obviously.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, what you just made. One of the things that I talked to even some of our church leaders about is, the church should look, and hopefully did look, different during this crisis, because, we quote that verse all the time that says, for me to live is Christ, but to die is gain.
Yeah.
But, hopefully we acted that way through the middle of the pandemic, and we're just so afraid of death that we're, completely changing everything and shutting everything down and not, I think it's in Hebrews where it says, forsake not the gathering of yourselves together,
Sure.
And I know there's different ways of making that, of accomplishing the same thing, doing online church or whatever. But I think the Lord wants us to meet together as believers.
And that's been the tightrope for church leaders over the last 12 months of when do you regather? How do you regather?
Yeah.
It's like walking in a minefield.
Yeah.
And so there was certainly an aspect of loving your neighbor.
Yeah.
Of, hey, we're gonna help with the overall community and not be a spreader.
Yeah.
While at the same time being cautiously aggressive in regathering. And we are just now getting to the point of kind of where we were 2019.
Yeah.
Before the pandemic. So it's been a unique, moment where we've all really needed the Lord's wisdom on how to regather safely and appropriately.
Life is a lot of life is about taking risk and taking the right kind of risk. Like you were just talking about, and I'm sure it did require a lot of wisdom and a lot of prayer and a lot of discussions with your staff and with not just with Cross Church, but with every church around the country to know what is the appropriate level of risk to take. But speaking of risk taking, that kind of gets into money and some of the things that we do at Mach 1. Life is full of risks, and that applies to taking risks with your money too. God, I don't believe, wants us to be risk averse, right? Mm-hmm. You see that in the parable of the talents, right?
Yeah.
The 5 talent servant, the 3 and the 1. The only one that didn't take any risk was the 1, and he was the one that got kind of rebuked, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, and I do think the Lord calls us, and I think that parable is a great example of that, of God just doesn't want you to just sit on it and don't do anything with it.
Yeah.
But all money is to be used for his purposes, regardless of how that plays out. And I think that parable gives us a good guideline and a good plan to move forward in those kind of ways.
Yeah, whether it be money or COVID or what, anytime fear is the driving force in your life, I think, it's a good time to reevaluate your priorities and what you're spending your time, meditating and focusing and praying on. But so Nick, it's always an interesting balance as a pastor, I'm guessing, and I've seen, talking about money in the church.
Oh yeah.
Right. It's the outsider's view of, the pastor's just going to try to ask for money or preach about. So how do you, but obviously money is a resource the Lord has given us to, further the gospel, to advance the kingdom. How do you balance, the public perception and not always just wanting to talk about money and give the church money and tithe and, but also preach because it's a very important topic and something that needs to be preached on.
Yeah, no, well, we're back to the tightrope conversation here and walking through a minefield. Sometimes whenever we are doing a specific sermon on money or giving, I'll even say it to the congregation. Listen, if it's your first time here and you were worried if I came to church, they were going to talk about money. Well, you have showed up on the day when we're actually talking about it. So come back another day, right. We won't be talking about it. But for us not to talk about it is to avoid a large part of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never known a mature, surrendered believer who didn't have their finances in order. Like, I think that's one area where we can measure maturity by so many different things. And when Jesus says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also, it's really a pointing to maturity of, listen, if you really want to follow me, this area of your life will be under control and it will be monitored well and used well and spent wisely. And I think there's been such a backlash because it's an idol of the heart in some ways. Yeah. And I'm not saying that there hasn't been, abuses of this in the church. There certainly has. But for the most part, you've got faithful pastors who are just trying to teach the word of God, saying, listen, this is not for us as much as it's for you. I have found myself saying that more and more recently of, I stand before you today and we don't need your money. Like, we're doing good. So that's always a blessing to be able to say, listen, like, we're okay, but you need to think about this for your own life. And so God has a way of speaking to his people in the ways that they need to hear, whether that's related to money or their marriage or whatever else across the spectrum.
Yeah. I think that's good that you said, don't know if you've ever seen a faithful, surrendered believer who doesn't have their finances in order. And we always see, you can easily and quickly see where someone's heart is by looking at their budget.
Sure.
And looking at where they're spending their money.
Yeah.
And it's just a good reminder that's not trying to, make anyone feel guilty. But I think we always need that constant nudge of, taking that extra leap of faith. Maybe you've been giving consistently and, faithfully for years, but it's time for you to take that extra step forward. And not getting comfortable.
Absolutely. And that's a hard thing as a preacher, because you're really putting yourself out there to also do that. And that's usually every time I talk about money or talk about giving in a church setting, I'm always talking about Meredith and I. which is my wife, Meredith,
Mhm.
not to lift us up, but to say, listen, I'm not asking you to do anything I'm not doing personally.
Right.
Like this, I tell people there's no pastoral exemption in the Bible
Mhm.
for generosity. Like it'd be cool if there was. I mean, it'd help me out a little bit, but there's no pastoral exemption. So when I'm reading a passage to the church about giving towards your local church and about being generous with other people, there's no out for me. And so I'm preaching to myself, preaching to my wife sitting on the front row, to my kids sitting there, and everybody else. So listen, this is a part of our Christian life, just like it's supposed to be a part of your Christian life as well.
Yeah.
And I think, I think you'd agree with me on this. Having a charitable mindset, having, giving a tenth or whatever the percentage that you give is about, part of it is about just making sure that money doesn't become an idol for us.
Sure.
And money doesn't have a hold on us, because it's probably one of the number one idols in our culture today, if not number one.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. You look at look at the American culture, and it's hard to disagree that it is one of the top idols in our society, and therefore within every one of us, therefore within our churches, there's a battle going on. And I think the reason why God calls us to consistent generosity is because there needs to be a consistent check on the heart. It's I don't just pray my way out of greed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm generous with my money as I get out of greed.
You obey your way out of
Yeah,
greed.
exactly. Yeah, it's a great way to say it.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I guess there's, because there is like this negative view or perception of tithing. And
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just because it's like it's like a defined rule. None of us like being told what to do, if we're
Yeah.
honest with ourselves.
Sure.
And so it's, the idea of giving, I feel like a lot of people like that, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, I choose that. But that set amount, I mean, do you think, is that fair? Am I accurate? Do you think that's why that tithing specifically, 10% has people push back on that, because it's like a defined rule and amount?
Yeah, I think I do think people see that, and they are watching their own bills every single month, and they are going through the personal struggle of that, and they're thinking, "You're crazy. For me to give 10% to my church, I'm struggling to make it on what I got now." And actually, I would, I think if we're honest with them, the New Testament calls us way beyond tithing.
Right.
And so the way I teach it here, and the way I say, like, listen, this is how Meredith and I practice generosity for the last 16 years of our marriage. The tithe to our church isn't even a conversation. Like,
Right.
that's not even do we have enough money this month? It's like, that's the first fruits to God, to our church. We've given to our church in Texas, now here at Cross Church. It's funny. I tell our church, the principle in the New Testament of giving is not tithing. It's generosity.
Mm-hmm.
Like, honestly, we kind of wish it was tithing,
Mm-hmm.
because I tell our people, I say, generosity knows no percentage.
Yeah.
And so that's why the Bible in the New Testament says each person should decide in his own heart what it is he is to give. And so I believe that we stand on the principle of the Old Testament, and the tithe becomes not the ceiling of our giving, but the floor of our giving. And then it's a personal relationship with the Lord. It's the Holy Spirit guiding me to say, okay, well, this year or this moment, you are going to do this. And the journey of generosity with the Lord can become an adventure, honestly. But if it's scary as all get out if you've never dipped your toe in the water.
Yeah.
You talk to people who've been faithful tithers or faithful in generosity for decades, and they're like, absolutely, wouldn't live any other way.
It's because they've learned, right?
They have.
They've seen the Lord's faithfulness as they've obeyed their way into growing their faith. They've seen how the Lord has provided, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I totally agree with you about how the New Testament standard is different. I think the New Testament standard is a higher standard, like you were saying.
Absolutely.
The Lord loves a cheerful giver is the New Testament standard. The Old Testament standard was a tenth. But also in the New Testament, Jesus tells us, I'm telling you, not one word of the law will pass away. I've not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. The Old Testament standard says, don't commit adultery. The New Testament standards don't even look with lust.
Absolutely.
The Old Testament standard is don't commit murder. The New Testament standard is don't even harbor hatred in your heart.
Yeah.
Right? So absolutely, I agree with you. The New Testament standard is a higher one. And I'm mentioning this because sometimes this comes up, working with people in their actually a lot of times this comes up, working with people with their money. We help them develop a budget a lot.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about that in a minute, because I think that's something that you guys have helped your members do through Financial Peace, if I'm not mistaken. And so a lot of times when it comes to that part about, the charitable giving, people start asking us, well, what should we do? And so this conversation that we just had comes up a lot.
Yeah, no doubt. And I heard, I think I read it from Tim Keller one time talking about the tithe. And he said, why did God make it 10%? He said, because the Lord knew for most people in the world throughout their lifetime, 10% is a major, massive sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And so for you to ever get there alone is a massive sacrifice for most people. And so it's just a journey, really is.
Yeah. So I mentioned Financial Peace University.
Yeah.
My understanding is that's something that you guys have helped your church members with, correct?
We did, yeah. It was probably 3 years ago now that we took the entire, I think almost the entire church, almost every small group through it.
Yeah.
And so it was great. I mean, I helped lead my own small group through it, and it was a fantastic journey where I think we're still seeing the benefits of that now.
Absolutely.
A few years later.
Yeah, it's one thing to ask people to, we all know it's in the Bible. We know that God wants us to be a cheerful giver and give a portion. But a lot of people just simply need the help of understanding how do I get my arms around this aspect of my life. So I think that's great.
I heard a pastor say it this way recently, and this is why what y'all do is so important. He said, most people in your church are not stingy. They're strapped.
Yeah.
So they sit there as we pray for the offering on Sunday mornings, or we give a sermon about giving, and they're like, man, if only I so want to be involved in giving to my church, giving to missions, feeling like I'm a part of what's going on here. I just don't have the money to do it. And so I almost think the church in general has, the last decade has really taken a step back and said, if we ever want to teach people how to be stewards, we have to teach them how to get unstrapped from debt, from lack of a budget, from all these things to where they can live a healthy financial life. And they're always more free personally. The thing about finances is it messes you up when they're wrong.
That's right.
Every part of your life, your relationships are harder, your stress level is up, your anxiety's through the roof. And when you get this in line and you're living in the biblical principles of contentment and tithing, when you just do it God's way, it works. That's true about every subject.
That's right.
And money's not exempt from that.
That's right. Because when you kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, if money becomes an idol and it's about keeping up with the Joneses, well, guess where that tends to lead? To mega debt.
Sure.
And when you got too much debt, you can't figure out, well, how can I give anything? I gotta have every penny to make all these debt service payments, to have the car and the house and everything else.
Absolutely.
And so teaching people that's a big part of what we do. Simply teaching people how to get on a budget and how to get out of debt. It's very common when someone comes in to see us that, once we start to get into what the whole situation is, we end up telling them, you don't need to invest right now. You need to pay down this.
Absolutely.
debt.
No doubt.
I think the big shift, I know for me personally, it's been something I've seen, but for a lot of believers is when you just mature in your faith and the realization of like, where do your resources come from? And it's not, oh, this is my salary. It's like, well, this is all the Lord's. Right. He's blessed me with having the responsibility to use it. Right. And so tithing or giving generously, you look at that very different when you really, really start to let that soak in and listen, none of this is mine. I mean, this is all the Lord's that he's just kind of funneled through me, but it's not of my own efforts that I've gone out and created this. And it's just encouragement to really, because that's hard, right? I mean, our society today is all about like promotions and money, right? We talked about money being in one of, if not the number one idol, one of the top idols, and seniority in the workplace. And so it's all about me, you, what are you doing? What am I doing? And just constant, I think daily, weekly reminding ourselves that, this is all from the Lord. This is all the Lord's. And it's our responsibility to, act like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's the difference between being a steward and an owner. Something I know you guys probably talk to people about all the time. Do I think this is all mine, or do I think God's just using me as a funnel to different people. I heard somebody say years ago, you never see a U-Haul attached to the back of a hearse. Like, you can't take your stuff with you.
Right.
And when people are on their deathbed, they don't care about their stuff.
That's right.
They want the people in their life.
It's the relationships.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a lot of this goes back to where the conversation started, is like the fear of dying.
Yeah.
Right. And if Earth and this moment is all you know and think life will ever be, right? That I could see where that could be very scary.
Yeah.
And you would want to maximize all of the now,
Yeah.
right? But I think we just need to always encourage each other. Conversations like this are great, right? This is a podcast we're recording, but having these kinds of conversations on a regular basis with other believers and non-believers, and just encouraging each other to not live in fear. And after living through a global pandemic, we just have a very recent example to give.
And I think that for me, a verse comes to mind as he was talking there about how, Jesus said, I've come that you might have life and have it more abundantly.
Yeah.
Right. The abundant life doesn't mean that you've got all this stuff. It means that you've got the relationships. That's what's going to last for eternity. And you can live life without just being in constant fear of, oh my gosh, am I going to die of COVID? Or, oh my goodness, am I going to have enough money to last for the rest of my life, or whatever? That to me is what the abundant life is a life without fear.
Sure.
A life full of faith, and a life full of great relationships with other believers.
Yeah. I think that's so true. And, I think the thing with people, and what they often hear from maybe even pastors or leaders about money is, I think, well, if you have stuff, you're an evil person, or if you have a nice car, a nice house. I don't think that's the teaching of the Bible. I think what we need to wrestle with is, and it goes to what you're saying, if it all went away tomorrow, do you still have abundant life?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, then you realize it's not that you had your stuff actually had you.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of people get possessions wrong is it's maybe even without realizing it, it becomes the idol in their life. And if it was all stripped away, their identity stripped away, and that's never a good place to be.
Yeah. All right. So, Nick, this has been a great podcast today. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. It's definitely been kind of out of what I would call the norm for one of our podcasts, but most of the people who come in to see us, we're always very open about our faith. People know where we stand.
Yeah.
So, and I think, your faith is critically intertwined with your money. Like Jesus said, where your heart is, there your treasure will be also. So it's important it's an important aspect of financial planning is how do we manage our money in a way that God would want us to. With this podcast says the podcast kind of tagline is that we provide financial information on topics such as investing, insurance, financial planning, and everything related to your money. Well, this has been kind of the everything else part related to your money today.
For sure.
But it's been really, really good, and I think people will find it useful. So again, thank you for your time today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. And again, thanks for what y'all do for so many people.
Absolutely. So as always, to wrap it up, guys, email any questions or topics that you guys have, any guests that you'd like to see on the show. You can email us at podcast@mach1fg.com. Thank you, Nick, again for joining us. We really appreciate what you do in our community and the leader that you are. Our thought for the day, we're going to throw a verse at you. This is actually NIV version, Hebrews 13:5. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. That's it for today. We appreciate you listening to the podcast, and we look forward to you joining us next time on the Mach 1 Market Moment.
A quick reminder, the host of this show are employees of Mach 1 Financial Group. Guests on the show may be clients of Mach 1 Financial Group, and comments should not be taken as an endorsement or testimonial of the firm. Comments are the sole opinion of the speaker and do not reflect the opinion of Mach 1 Financial Group. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and nothing said on the show should be taken as investment advice. Employees and clients of Mach 1 Financial Group may maintain positions in the securities or strategies discussed.
Mach 1 Financial Group, Inc., Mach 1, is an SEC-registered investment advisor located in Bentonville, Arkansas. Mach 1 may only transact business in those states in which it maintains a notice filing or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from registration requirements. SEC registration does not constitute an endorsement of the firm by the Commission, nor does it indicate that the advisor has attained a particular skill level or ability. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The information presented is the sole opinion of the speaker and is not meant to be investment advice. Mach 1 does not provide tax or legal advice. You should speak with your tax or legal advisor regarding your specific situation. For full disclosures, please visit www.mach-1financial.com/disclosures.